Today we got our first look at the Xbox Project Scorpio, and it looks pretty good. This came courtesy of Digital Foundry. Now, they announced this ahead of time. We talked about it on Newswave. Thursday was going to be the day, Thursday morning in particular for me, was going to be the day that we got our first look at the specs for the Xbox Project Scorpio. And I was a little surprised, a little bit, and really when they started going really deep into the specs, I started to realize that the potential for 4K was there. And then when they showed it in action with their screenshot that showed GPU utilization, and I was really blown away at that point. There are some really cool ideas in here with the system, so let's just go through it and you guys can kind of judge for yourself as well. First things first, I'm gonna hit you guys with a bunch of specs, just real quick to get those out of the way. So we start off with the 8-core CPU clocked at 2.3 gigahertz. It's the same CPU for the most part. It's the standard 8-core Jaguar CPU that we've seen in the Xbox One, the PS4, PS4 Pro now. So it's pretty much the same across the board. It makes sense. They really don't need a better CPU at this point. They needed a better GPU and they needed better memory throughput, which they have now received. From there, we go to the GPU, which is sitting at 40 compute units at 1172 megahertz. That's actually pretty good. That's up from the PS4 Pro's compute units and everything, so that's great. It is the strongest system, so I would expect it to be. From there, we go to memory, which was really a key selling point here. It is using quite a bit of memory, because remember, it is trying its hardest to push 4K, which is a very, very difficult set of images to push through when you're playing a game, potentially at 60 frames. 12 gigs of GDDR5 memory, 4 gigs are set aside for the OS, 8 gigs are set aside for the games. They set an extra gig aside, I assume, to help for 4K rendering on the title screen, the main menus and everything, going through the operating system. All that stuff being rendered at 4K probably does need that extra gig just to help with that. Now, the memory itself has been set in stone at 320 gigabytes per second. They exceeded that a little bit at 326 gigabytes per second. They're using GDDR5, which is fine the way they're doing it. They're going to use a 384-bit bus, 12 channels, 32 bits each, and that will work. That just gives the CPU plenty of access to all of the memory, which will help it call images and stuff a lot easier. Really, there shouldn't be much of a bottleneck here with this memory bandwidth. Now, from what we're seeing, the GPU should be using Polaris. It's not going to use Vega. It's not going to be a Ryzen chip. It'd be very difficult for them to use really either at this point without charging an arm and a leg. And I think doing what they're doing here and really optimizing and squeezing as much potential out of Polaris and the Jaguar CPU is going to help them along and help them with that pricing. So no, it's sitting right now at a 16 nanometer FinFET Polaris chip. Again, Polaris more than likely. Didn't hear anything about that, but if the PS4 Pro is using it, this is a 16 nanometer FinFET, it's probably going to stick with Polaris. And really, if I had to compare it to any video card right now, it's probably more of like a souped up RX 480 from ATI and AMD, which is good because that would place this system somewhere between the GTX 1060 and 1070 after all of its optimizations, which at the optimizations they're using and being developed specifically for the system, 4K is completely possible. So let me get into like the smaller things that really caught my eye here, because there are some really good ideas here for this system, like really, really cool things that they're doing to really help them get to that 4K set. And the biggest thing I saw was that Microsoft is essentially building DirectX 12 into the GPU. It's not going to really be running off of software. They've built it into the hardware, and that's Let me explain to you how they're doing that exactly. So inside that system on a chip, that SoC that you keep seeing pictures of, this big chip on that board, there is a GPU and there is a CPU. Between the both of those, there is a GPU command processor, and this command processor helps the CPU call images, call commands to the GPU. The GPU delivers it, they draw it on the screen, and you go from there. You've always had to use DirectX 12 kind of as like a software thing. It's built into the operating system. In this case, they have built DirectX 12 directly into that GPU command block, which is really cool. That is a great idea because it's going to help instructions per set come down to 11. And usually it can be thousands of draw calls if it needs it. And that's very taxing on the CPU and the GPU together to make that happen. Doing this really removes like resource overhead for that whole thing to take place. And going down from thousands to 11 is massive, and I think that's probably their biggest optimization here. That is really what's going to put them over the edge and squeeze a lot out of the 6 teraflops. Now keep in mind, this also means that it's really only going to be useful from what I can tell, at least at this time from what they're saying, for DirectX 12 stuff. Now, there is quite a few things that use it. Battlefield 1, the Forza games, and then any others that really are designed for Windows 10 using that DirectX 12 should be the same on the Xbox One and should take advantage of that GPU command block. They also revealed that they are going to use a next-gen HEVC codec, and it will allow game DVR to be 4K at 60 frames, so you can record all the stuff you're doing well above whatever frame rate you're running at 4K, which is really, really cool. The thing that really kind of concerned me a little bit, which isn't a big deal, is that we're going to be using a 1 terabyte hard drive in there. They said they're increasing the bandwidth because I have a feeling it's a mechanical drive, which 4K images should load fine into memory, no problem, but they did increase bandwidth for that hard drive, more than likely through like the SATA bus, and they are increasing it 50%, which should again help with any of the 4K stuff going on. 4K is very taxing. There's a lot of information being transferred. In fact, if you don't believe me, go down in the description. I left a link to the image of this Forza image I'm going to show you guys, and see how long it takes to load up on your internet connection on your computer. That image you are seeing is the full 4K resolution that is uncompressed. The Xbox Scorpio, Project Scorpio, is going to be drawing that 60 times a second on your screen when it's playing. Now, we did also find out it's going to be using a vapor chamber cooler. That's the cooling system it's going to use with a blower model fan. So think of like how the GTX 1080, like the 1080, 1070 have that same type of kind of lower profile blower model fan with vapor chamber. That is very, very good at cooling these systems, and it will give you one point of exit out the back. There will not be any of those weird intake vents on the top of the Xbox anymore. If you get a Scorpio, it's just going to expel air directly out of the back of the system, and cooling should be very good. Cooling on the 1080, the 1070 is also good. I would expect this system to be rather quiet with a very mild to medium high, somewhere in there, because remember, this is going to be a very hot system without that vapor chamber, and with it, it will still probably be kind of hot, but it's going to keep it as cool as possible. I would see it kind of in like the medium range for heat. So what do we think about the Scorpio? Well, when we saw the image originally that you're seeing here, I looked at it and I said, that's really cool, it's 4K. They started talking about it. They said, hey, it's Forza 6 that we had on the Xbox One a few years ago. Because remember, the last one that came out was Horizon 3. They seem to do like a switch off between studios to do either one. And they tell us it's Forza 6, and it is ported from the original Xbox One, and they did it in 2 days. They moved it over to the Scorpio. It ran fine. In fact, if you look at the top, it is achieving 60 frames per second with 66% of the GPU being utilized. That is ridiculous. That means that it has another 33 to 34% of its GPU just going unused, which could be used for a couple different things. Now they went on to say in their interview that they had after their posting in their video that they were able to tweak the settings up to Ultra, which would be used on most PCs now that are, very strong. And it was using about 88% of the GPU power. So from what they're saying, the Scorpio should be capable of high to ultra settings at 4K, somewhere in the 30 to 60 frames per second range. Now keep in mind, this is one game that they have showed us. If they showed us more than one game, I would have been much more interested. We see a driving game, racing game, that is heavily optimized already. Forza is a very, very well-optimized game engine. It is. It runs well on the Xbox One, ran well on the 360, ran well on the original Xbox. So I wanted to see more. I wanted to see something maybe out, not something that was in-house. Like Battlefield 1 would have been very interesting to see on the system. It runs DirectX 12. It's a very demanding game. It would have been very cool to see how many frames that could pull at 4K with ultra or even high settings, but it was a very controlled showing that they did for Digital Foundry. They wanted to get the spec-heavy stuff out of the way. This was not a visit for games. This was a visit to show Digital Foundry what is in the system. And it's really for tech heads. That's what it's for. It's for people who know about this stuff to look at it and say, okay, that should be able to do 4K. And it looks like it can. We don't really even see anything in motion on it, though. This was just a still. He's basically telling us, yes, it's legit. These are the people from Digital Foundry. Yes, it's legit. It runs it fine, and even at high to ultra settings, it still ran it at 60 frames. So now we get into, is it worth getting a Scorpio? Well, if you have 4K, like a 4K TV, Yeah, it probably is, because you're going to get the same type of games for your Xbox One, but you'll be able to actually have them run on your 4K TV the way it's meant to be played, which is at high resolution gameplay. Now the question is, if you have a 1080p TV, is it worth getting? And that answer is maybe, because we do know that it's going to super sample or downsample images when you're playing, so you will have a 4K image that will then be shrunken down to your 1080p screen, which will really help with things like aliasing. So around edges, you won't really have all of those weird jaggies. It will be pretty much clean all the way around, and textures, of course, will also be shrunken down, so they will look very nice as well. And if you have a game that runs dynamic resolution, like Halo 5, for example, where it will change resolution depending on how much is going on the screen, well, it's going to be maxed out the entire time on that system if you're running on a 1080p screen, so it will never drop resolution. It shouldn't drop frames either. I do think, really, that they may have been a little late to the party now. Obviously, the PlayStation 4 Pro was the best system that could have been made last year. I don't think anyone's disputing that. But now we're a little further ahead, and technology is a little better, so Microsoft comes out with their Scorpio. That's the reason they announced it last year and didn't release it last year. It wasn't doable. At least within reason for the price target that they had, which I still think is $499.99, by the way. I think at that point they said, look, we have to wait. We'll give PlayStation and Sony this opportunity, I guess, to take this year, and we'll come out next year with a very powerful system that is going to be true 4K without the weird upscaling features. Although they are saying that the developers can use upscaling if they need to. So with that, I do think that Xbox waited too long. Really, they could have done the same thing the PS4 Pro did, a half step, and then kind of saved this whole Scorpio thing, built it up more, and just had it ready for the next system that they have in their next generational leap. Although it is looking more and more like there will be no more generational leaps. It will be these weird half steps that eventually add up to the next generation, where we get to, like, it's the PlayStation 4 Pro, then it's like the PlayStation 4 Pro S or whatever, and it's, oh, that's actually the PlayStation 5, we're just going to rebrand it. We're getting to a point now where half steps seem to be the norm, and it's a weird time because 1080p was out. They were still conquering 1080p. I mean, the Xbox One came out when 1080p was like the norm, and it couldn't do 1080p regularly. It still had to drop to 900p. And I think really 4K snuck up on both of these companies. I don't think Sony or Microsoft were anticipating the outcry for 4K, and it caught up to them, and they both had to do this weird half step. And who's to say that in 2 or 3 years, the next Xbox is going to come out, and here's Scorpio, which is still going to be strong, is just going to kind of be sitting around twiddling his thumbs, and people are just going to feel like they're upgrading from 4K to then more 4K. So where do these companies go after this? But yeah, guys, those are my thoughts on the Scorpio. I think it's a good system for what it's offering. It's definitely a step up from the original Xbox One. It's 4.5 times more powerful, has ridiculous amounts of power behind it for a console. This thing is going to rival like a GTX 1070 with its optimization and the fact that developers know what they're making it for. They know they're making it for, say, the Xbox Scorpio. If somebody's developing a game for the PC, they don't know that every person out there is going to have a GTX 1070. Even a 1060 or 1080, they have to develop it for everything in mind. Whereas here, they know what the Scorpio has to offer, so games will run better, and it will definitely punch well above its weight of what is already a very strong 6 teraflops. And really, if I had to give Microsoft any bit of advice, it's, look, you got your specs out of the way, we know what's coming, show us the games. You have a great system here, obviously, a very powerful system, but games need to be out there for us to play on it. Otherwise, people will pass over it for things like the PlayStation or even the Switch if the games are better on either one. And we already know Sony and Nintendo are more than capable of bringing exclusive games to either one. So make sure you show up at E3 with some games. That's it for now, guys. Make sure you comment, like, and subscribe, all that good stuff. Let me know what you think about the Scorpio down in the comments. I'm very curious, and I will see you next time.